Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Stash. I already repeated last time what I said on the last episode. This is actually part 2 of the big sting. Now, I talked about Kinetic's FA-18 Hornet kit and 148 scale. Well, I also have Hasegawa's. Actually, I got about 4 of them. Hasegawa's 148 scale FA-18 Hornet. This kit was released long before the Kinetic kit was released. And I'll give you a little bit more brief history on the Hornet, a little more maybe. No, maybe not. Bore you to death. We'll actually talk about the kit though. The Hasegawa Hornet was released sometime in the early to mid 90s, and up until that point, as I said before, the only decent kit in town was the Breville Monogram kit, which could only be built as a single-seater. And as I said before, it could be a bear to assemble, and it required some work. It wasn't that great. So, when the Hasegawa kits came out, they received a warm welcome at that time, and it was the standard for a while. So, until the Kinetic kit came out, the Hasegawa kit was the bar. Matter of fact, this is actually, I think this is mid-2000 boxing right here. This is the C version. They actually released a few of them. You have the A, the B, the C, and the D. The B release is not that common. The A, it's about as common as the C. And then you have the D, which was the Night Attack. So, they also have special boxings of their Hornet kits from time to time, mostly with decals. Let's get on with the kit, shall we? Anyway, this is the Hasegawa right here. This is the upper airframe. As you can tell here, this is typical Hasegawa. Nice quality, nice scribing, good, and it's pretty accurate. And I've built 4 of these so far. Here's the cockpit here. This is actually pretty similar. Even though this is for the two-seater, they actually show in the instructions that if you're building a single seat, you just cover it. That's it, basically in a similar manner to the Kinetic kit. But the detail is pretty good, as you can see here. The cockpit, this is your intakes, part of the main gear well. Now, and here's actually the hell hole, which is this is part of the canopy. Since this is the single seat version, here's the parts specific. This right here is for the single seater. What else have we got here? The Hasegawa kit is actually a little bit different as compared to the Kinetic, as I said before. As you can see here, the engineering, this is the engineering, how it works. This is a multi-part lower piece. You got this part here, you got these 2 here. The nose section is completely different. And also, if you want to add the light to it, you're going to have to cut that spot out, which if you're building a Canadian or whatever country uses that. But the Hasegawa kit, even though they give you separate boxings, the most recent boxing actually gives you the A or the C. I think they made a B and a D release too. They also give you parts to build as either the A or the C, or sometimes they leave certain parts in there. For example, the nose gear doors, for example, I'll show you the tails here. This is actually tails for the C, by the way. If you can't find the A version from the Hasegawa kit, it's pretty easy to convert to C. All you got to do is just delete that fairing there. Leave this one, but delete that one and whatever little modifications you got. And if you can't find the nose gear door for the A version, you do that. You just remove that. That's pretty simple. Otherwise, this is a really nice kit. As you tell, the engineering is slightly different. Now, here is the flare pod, which is usually used on Hornets with a night attack capability. We'll discuss that a little more later. Like I said, the engineering's thought out. I've built 4 of them, and they get easier, but they don't get better. This kit is actually a pretty complex kit, especially as compared to the Kinetic kit. As you can tell here, there's parts for the flaps. Here's the other flaps here. Like the Kinetic kit, you can put the flaps in the neutral or the lower position, which is actually, as I said before, it's a very nice option because when the Hornet is on the ground and not in use, the flaps drop naturally because of all hydraulic power being lost. Towards the centerline pylon, this is a little excessive for me, but sometimes it is difficult trying to mold a single piece pylon. Lower wing section, which gives you the option of drilling out the holes for the pylons. Of course, you get, if you want to. Okay, here's the stuff. Now, of course, generic Hornet parts. Main gear, fuel tanks, pylons, rails, and other odds and ends, which are right here. Matter of fact, here, you can see right here the options are, I will pull this out as a matter of fact. You see the options here. If you're building a 2-seat, you could use both seats provided in the kit, otherwise you can get away with one. Here's the sway braces here. Here's the engine. They give you two styles. They give you the later style exhaust, if you could see that here, which is similar to the General Electric 110 turbofan, or they give you the earlier style, which would have first appeared on the FA-18A. Of course, check your references if you're not sure. They give you four fuel tanks. There's two here, so in the other two, they're both the same sprue. Especially if you're doing the 2-seater. Of course, vertical ejector rack here, pylons. Here's where you can put the flaps. You got neutral, lowered. There's actually 3 of them. Of course, other ends, missile rail, part for the ejector seat, a pilot. The ejector seat's a little bit better, but it's still not as, you're still better off using an aftermarket ejection seat because Hasegawa always adds a pilot, and they're going to assume you're going to add the pilot to the kit. This isn't always the case. In my case, I rarely, if ever, add a pilot, unless I feel it just needs it. This is the main gear wheels right here. This is actually split in halves for the main gear, and that's nose gear. But the parts, there's not as many parts, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Here's let's see what else we got. We got photo etch. Of course, let's see if we can get this right. Landing ladder. I forgot. That's part of the ladder you have for the heads up. This goes inside the nose gear well. Now you got chaff and flare, which goes on the underside. These parts are actually for whichever you're going to do, either the A or the C. This is a nice touch because the cockpit display doesn't have that. It doesn't have them. That's why they put them in photo etch. This actually makes life a little bit easier. And as I said before, I'm not a fan of photo etch. I'm very, how can I put it, clumsy with it at best. Yeah, it's similar to the Connecticut. But in this case, this is a little more troublesome for me because it's stainless steel. It's not brass. And we'll get on after that. Now, what makes this interesting about this kit, when they first released it, it was very difficult to get the main gear done. It wasn't like nowadays where all they have to use is AutoCAD and actually translate it into cutting the molds. This is pre-AutoCAD days. This is, I mean, when AutoCAD was just starting to become a big thing. It was mostly used for, excuse me, it was mostly used for like designs and blueprints works. And started going on there. This is actually white metal. This is the main gear here. All you gotta do is add necessary parts to it, which are in plastic. I mean, it's a little excessive, but it's innovative at the same time. I could understand it because also it's very sturdy and it's pretty solid, so it won't collapse on you. You just gotta make sure you use super glue. Here's the nose gear right here. Like I said, it's a little excessive, but it's pretty innovative. All you have to do is add the parts accordingly. And if you don't like them, you can always get aftermarket landing gear. They do make white metal aftermarket landing gear. And here's a little tidbit for you. Now, I mentioned about the Hobby Boss a little bit. I'm not fond of it. I built one, and even though it's a knockoff of the Hasegawa kit, it's not that great. However, you can actually use the parts from a Hasegawa kit on the Hobby Boss kit. A lot of people didn't know that. Might be certain areas you can't, but there's a lot of areas you can. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Here, of course, typical Hasegawa instructions. So instructions right here. Multilingual, but they're concise. They're clear as day, as you can see here. Very easy to follow. There's very little, if any, errors. And if you're not following this to the hilt, following this to the T, you can always deviate a little bit, especially if you got your reference. So it's really not that hard. The drawback to this kit is you can only build it as is, you know. But to be fair, this was molded during the time. Like I said, this was molded during the 90s, so it represented the Hornet as it was just hitting its stride. So fortunately, there are aftermarket parts, but we'll discuss a little more of that a little bit later. Here's the decal placement, of course. And this boxing provides markings for two naval, U.S. Navy, and one U.S. Marine. And I'll show you a little bit. The main markings are Fist of the Fleet, VFA 25, then you got Marauders, VFA 82. Both were, no, that's not Fist of the Fleet. I was wrong. That's actually the VFA 113 Stingers right there. Actually, it does provide both. It does provide both the Stingers and Fist of the Fleet. I was wrong. And it also provides let's see if I can find it. Yes, it does provide the U.S. Marine Corps markings for the Red Devils right here. And I will show you the decal sheet in a little bit. Everything else seems okay, but the stenciling, the colors are a little off for the stenciling, as you can see here. I would recommend trying to avoid these whenever necessary, at least the stenciling part. Everything else seems okay. The colors are printed well. They're in register. Unfortunately, Hasegawa has a habit of being a little flaky with their decals. Even though they're thin and they're delicate, the colors are just a touch off. I don't know why. It's just a weird habit. I think it has to do with the paints they use that they match them with, which is usually GSI Creus or Gun Sangyo, for you guys who remember it. But I would replace them anyway, especially if you're not fond of them, because they do make aftermarket decals for these same squadrons. Well, except for maybe not for the Red Devils, but it's the main squadron. Go back here. I make it a habit of making sure the clear parts are bagged at all times. Matter of fact, here they are. Of course, pesky seam line amongst the canopy, but it doesn't have it amongst the windscreen, so that makes life a little bit easier. It's, like I said, it's just a really good kit. It really is. Now, this is the extent of it. I've built 4 of these, and at that time when this kit was released, it was a very complex kit. And to be fair, the FA-18 Hornet is very difficult to recreate in plastic, but so far Hasegawa nailed it. And for a while, it was the kit to get. I do have 2 gripes about this kit, and I will state about this. I will start. One will lead to the other, and here's why. The first one is they only provide one option. Now, it's not like the Connecticut where they provide all the options. Fortunately, they corrected this back in the mid to late 2000s, at least with this kit, where you can build it as the A or the C. And it doesn't take much to backdate an FA-18 Hornet from a C to an A. Just use your references. Remove a couple of buttons, and don't use a couple of blisters. You're good to go. And with this kit especially, they still retain the FA-18A ECM blisters on the under the intake. I'll show you in a little bit, which is over here. They still retain that. So if you're going to build a C, you remove that and you remove that as a C, and then you add the on the bulge of it itself, you just add the blisters to it. If you can find if you find the Hasegawa FA-18 kit, you don't need to use those. In my case, I've got some backdating to do. The rest of the kit, it's very good, but it's a very complex kit. This is not an easy kit build. I will tell you that right off the bat. When I first built that, I was sweating bullets, making sure everything aligned and everything was very little seam filling as possible. If it's done right, the Hasegawa kit won't need any filling and sanding. Maybe a little sanding, but no filling. Like I said, I built 4 of them. It can be a little complex, and I don't really recommend it for beginners because there's the big reason why. One, the price. It's a great kit, and it was the gold standard for many years, but it's not cheap. When it first came out, it ranged anywhere from $75 to nearly $95. I mean, that's a little hard for me to swallow. When I bought a whole series of these, I got them for like half price. I mean, it was a little expensive for me, but half price is better than paying the full extent, which means I got them for about anywhere from $45 to $50, which is better than paying full. The second problem with this is the lack of ordnance. I mean, the good part is it comes with the pods that it used during that point in time. Like, it comes with the FLIR, which is for the night attack version. It comes with I think it's a laser tracker pod or a tracking pod. They used it during Desert Storm. Same thing with the FLIR. And the other pod, I think, is a strike camera. I don't remember offhand. I got to check my references. Those were perfect during that time. And even though they came with that and the fuel tanks, they didn't provide ordnance. It would have been nice if they provided at least the basic ordnance, like at least the sidewinders and the sparrows. But given what the Hornet could carry, you're going to have no choice but to raid your spares box, or you're going to have no choice but to buy the weapon sets that are available for the Hornet. So it's really a no-win situation, and if they did add the ordnance, it would have jacked up the price, which not everybody's willing to pay. I'm serious on that one. Which leads me to the third point. This kit is expensive enough as it is. It is not cheap by any means. So any aftermarket, there's plenty of aftermarket stuff. I shouldn't say any. There's plenty of aftermarket stuff for it. If you get a two-seater, you can build it as the ATARS version if you find a conversion set for it, which is, once again, not cheap. You can use detail sets. Most you really need for this, in my opinion, is a replacement ejection seat. Because let's face it, even though they provide the ejection seat in the kit, it's kind of generic. You know, as I said in the last video, the A variant used the SJU 5 or the 6, or 5/6, due to two-seater FA-18B, and the early C models used that. But starting from later FA-18Cs on, and D, all the way to the E and the F, it used in the SJU-17, which is the Naval SE's ejection seat, which is also used in the F-14D Tomcat. So you're going to have to replace it. They do make cockpit sets for this. Yeah, avionics, yeah, black box if you can find them on the internet from time to time. Ares makes a set. They do make afterburner sets, which personally I don't think is really necessary because nobody's really going to look in there in the, well, at least in the exhaust section. I mean, outside is one thing, but the inside, no, not really. I would also do recommend being very wary when you're painting, at least this one. Hasegawa started a trend with the fine panel lines, like the resets, and I shouldn't say they started it, but they're very well known for it. And with each release, they got better and better with their kits. But this one, I will say this, be wary when you're painting it because the scribing's nicely done. It's actually very petite and a little on the delicate side. So if you do any filling or sanding, try not to obliterate the detail. You just be careful with it. Seriously. I mean, I'm pretty good with it, so I was able to avoid obliterating the detail. It doesn't take much to remove it. And that's going to require rescribing. Something you don't want to do. And what else? So be careful with that. The assembly, take your time with it. If you got to deviate from the instructions, deviate. I had no problems with it because I'm very familiar with Hasegawa's kits. Take your time with it. You know, dry fit everything, test fit everything. Once you got everything where you want it, tack in spots with glue and cement, and you should be okay. Not a problem with it. Of course, like I said before, ordnance, you're stuck. Ordnance, you're going to have to scrounge. Otherwise, everything else is really good on the kit. Like I said, don't take much to convert it back to whatever. Like I said, since this is C, I'm converting it back into an A. It really doesn't take much at all. So this is the good part about it. Another reason why I don't recommend this for beginners, besides the complex engineering, even though the fit's rather good on this kit, is because it provides multimedia parts. Hasegawa doesn't do this very often, and even when they do, it's only limited amounts. In this case, because of the white metal landing gear and the photo etch parts, crazy glue, super glue, or whatever the scientific name for it is called, be wary of that. I'm very dead serious on that. You only need small amounts, but if you're looking at someone who glues his hands together a lot, and like I said, I'm rather clumsy with photo etch, so I don't recommend that for beginners at all. But it does help with the kit itself. I mean, the landing gear, the white metal landing gear, is actually pretty sturdy and solid. As long as you have everything carefully and nicely glued in place, it won't be so much a hassle. Although, I do recommend one thing. Please use a primer on the white metal landing gear because it won't take paint too well. It might enamel, but if you use acrylic like I do, spray it. Prime it. It's a must. Of course, like the Kinetic, it's got the seam. If you're a beginner, don't worry about it. most of us intermediate modelers to advanced, we already know how to handle seams on kits like that. Just take your time, put it together. Be careful with the flaps too. They're kind of delicate. As I said before, I built 4 of them. They got easier with each kit I've assembled, but not better, just easier, because I got very familiar with it. Otherwise, everything else is fine. Decals replace, as I said before. There's plenty of aftermarket stuff, decals. There's plenty of aftermarket stuff if you want to do any detail work, modifications, whatever. And sometimes from time to time, especially go to swap meets or online, eBay, Evil Bay as we call it, they do have the older superscale decal sheets for the tail end of the Cold War for the early FA-18 Hornets. Like I said, as long as you got your reference and you got the tools you need and you know what you got to do, you're going to be just fine with the kit. Any other recommendations? No, that's it. Hopefully in the next video, I'll compare both the Hasegawa and the Kinetic kit, and I'll have a discussion about between the two. And because for a while, I mean, it's old and it doesn't have the updates like the Kinetic kit does. But as I said before, this was molded in the days before AutoCAD in the 90s. So there was quite a bit of a gap, about 20 years between Hasegawa and Kinetic. And it's still a really good kit, so don't throw it away. This is all I got for now. So, next, as I said before, apologize for repeating myself. Next video, we'll talk about comparing the two. And that's it. So, happy holidays. Happy holidays. Well, if you count Valentine's Day. So, happy modeling. Take it easy, and hopefully we'll talk about comparing the two very soon. Have fun.